Good morning. Welcome to the Community Voice. I'm Steve Radick, your host. Delighted to have you with us. We have a very special program today. We're welcoming back to the Community Voice airways after I think almost a 3-year absence, and William J. Federer. Good morning, Bill. Are you with us?
Hey, it's great to be with you.
Well, it's good to have you back. Last time you were here, we talked about your book on socialism, and then you flew into town for a speaking engagement, and we just kind of lost contact over the last several years. But those who are not familiar with Bill, you can hear him twice each morning on WLBB at 6:50 and 7:50 with the American Minute. And you want to learn more, go to theamericanminute.com. And we're very proud to have him. Bill's spoken all across America at events from Mount Rushmore to the Lincoln Memorial to the U.S. Capitol. He addressed audiences, congressmen, senators, candidates, sports stars, military officers, spoken at political conventions and many, many more events. He gained national recognition for lecturing and writing and receiving an honorary doctorate of humanities from American Christian College in 2004, an honorary doctorate of global leadership from Midwest University in 2013. And he has a business degree from St. Louis University. Bill also campaigned for Congress in 2000. He was key in keeping the U.S. majority control as his opponent, House Majority, when Minority Leader Dick Gephardt had to give up his plans of campaigning. Very extensive bio. Bill's first book, America's God and Country Encyclopedia of Quotations, has sold over 500,000 copies. His works, which have been quoted by authors, politicians, journalists, teachers, and students, and in court cases, and has written over 20 books. Today we're going to be referencing his book, The Treacherous World of the 16th Century, and how the Pilgrims escaped it, as we lead up to the as we celebrate Thanksgiving this week. We kind of recap and revisit the history of the first Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims and the adversity and the situation that they found themselves when they came to America, and how it led setting the stage, if you will, for it. And with that, again, good morning, Bill.
Hey, great to be with you. Well, this is a wonderful time of the year, and we do look back to the Pilgrims as the origin of self-government in America. And it's a fascinating story, if you'd like me to get into it.
Sure, yeah. We just, unfortunately, we're going to be limited on time, but give us a lead-in and set the stage, if you would, for that first Thanksgiving. It was from coming over from Holland, escaping to Holland, and coming from Holland to the adversities that they found when they arrived at Cape Cod. Just go ahead and of course the Mayflower Compact that you just referenced. Give us a little bit in a nutshell of that overall history.
Right, so we look first at Islam and how they conquered Egypt and North Africa and the Holy Land and Turkey, and they were surrounding Vienna, Austria in 1529, and the King of Spain is trying to stop this Islamic invasion, and in the middle of all that, the Reformation starts with Martin Luther. And so the King of Spain has two problems, a double dilemma. He's got this Islamic invasion of Europe from the outside, and now the Reformation on the inside of Europe. And he tries to stop both for centuries, but then finally decides he needs the Protestants' help. So he does the Peace of Augsburg of 1555, and that lets every king decide what's going to be believed in his kingdom. And so Europe began to divide up, where England was Anglican, Scotland was Presbyterian, and northern Germany and Sweden were Lutheran, and Switzerland was Calvinist, and Holland was Dutch Reformed, and Italy, Spain, France, Austria, Poland stayed Catholic. But it was one Christian denomination per country, and if you didn't believe the way your particular king did, you fled. And so in 1572, the King of Spain sends the Iron Duke of Alba to Antwerp, Holland, and kills 10,000 Dutch Reformed. 1572, the Queen of France, Catherine de' Medici, kills 30,000 Huguenots in Paris, called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And so if you didn't believe the way your king did, you were in trouble. And so in England, Henry VIII decides that he wants another wife, and the Pope won't recognize his divorce, and so he decides to break from Rome, make himself his own Pope, and he's the head of the Church of England, and he goes on to have 6 wives, not at the same time, but their fates were divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So Henry VIII was not a really nice guy to be married to. But he made everybody take the oath of supremacy, where you had to acknowledge the king as the head of the church in England. Well, you had people inside of the church wanting to purify it, and so they were nicknamed Puritans. And then you had another group that said it's beyond hope of purifying, we're going to separate ourselves. And they would meet in secret in barns and basements, and they would get arrested. And so the king had the Book of Common Prayer. What's that? Well, if you felt like praying, instead of making up your own prayer, because you could make up one that's wrong, the government wrote all the prayers down and put them in a book, and the Book of Common Prayer. So when you feel like praying, you just open it to the right page and read the prayer. And if you're caught making up your own prayers, a little Bible study, the FBI will, their version of it, will kick in the door and will drag you away to the Star Chamber. It's a room in the government building with stars on the ceiling, sort of like a January 6th hearing room, right? It's a secret trial, no witnesses, no lawyers, and they would twist your arm and cut off your ear and brand you on the face as a heretic. And then they passed the 5 Mile Act. If you're caught preaching within 5 miles of a town and you did not get approval of the government, you're a criminal. Off to that Star Chamber. They passed the Conventicle Act. And so the conventicles were small groups of people, like Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there in the midst. And so one of the people captured during this was John Bunyan. And he had an unapproved Bible study, and he spent 12 years in that jail. And so anyway, the one group of separatists we call Baptists, and they did not want the king to be in charge of their church, and they had a covenant church model where instead of it being top-down rule by a king and bishops, it's bottom-up, where the people are all taught the Bible, and they can have their own copy of the Bible, and then they would elect their pastor, sort of a bottom-up type of structure. And the king didn't like that, and so he would arrest them and put them in the Newgate prison. They didn't feed you in the prison. You had to have some friend that missed you and would bring you food, and people would starve to death in the prison. Well, some of these separatists fled to Holland. Holland had 7 provinces that did not always agree, but they were willing to be tolerant of each other to fight Spain. It was an 80-year war of independence for the Netherlands to break away from Spain. But since these different 7 provinces didn't always believe the same thing, they had a little give and take. It was the most religiously tolerant place in all of Europe. So the pilgrims decided to flee from England and go to the Netherlands. Well, a group of pilgrims sold their property and went down to the port and bought passage on a ship. But right before the ship took off, the captain robs them and turns them over to the police, and they get put in jail as heretics. Another group of these separatists arranged for a Dutch ship to sail up the coast, and they would be waiting in little rowboats, and they would hurry up and row to the ship and then hightail it out of there. Well, the pilgrims show up a day early, and they're in the water, the waves are rocking, and the kids are getting sick, and the women say, can we just wait on the shore? And meanwhile, the Dutch ship comes, and the men row out, and they're stowing everything. But before they can come back for the women and children, somebody snitched. They saw the Dutch boat off the coast. They told the police come over the hill and capture the women and children. And the Dutch captain says, well, I don't have an army with me, and he pulls anchor and sails away with the men. You can just picture these women and children standing on the shore watching that ship getting smaller and smaller until it disappears over the horizon.
That's really kind of the first real significant adversity that they faced. But let's take a commercial break, and then we'll talk about Leiden, Holland, and the departure from there to the New World. But first, this commercial message.
Consider the Mobius strip. Take a strip of paper, twist it, connect the ends. This connection forms a continuous loop. Seamless, infinite. That's how your healthcare should be too. At Tanner Health, the Mobius is our symbol and our promise, representing our continuum of care and our commitment that the services you need will be here for you always. We're not just changing healthcare, we're redefining it. See more at tanner.org.
The Entrepreneur Scholar Journey at Oak Mountain Academy is designed to provide students with a clearly defined curriculum-based track to acquire essential knowledge and skills for success in business and leadership. Critical areas include identifying entrepreneurial characteristics, selecting a value position, and business model development. I'm Patrick Uran, head of school, inviting you to journey with us on the mountain. For more information, visit us at oakmountain.us. Discover your journey at OMA. Prepare, explore, and achieve.
Good morning. Welcome back. Bill Federer is on the phone with us, and we're getting prepared to enjoy Thanksgiving this week. And we're talking about the Pilgrims, and now they've made it to Holland, but they were there for 12 years. Bill, how did it go? And then tell us about their travels to get to Plymouth Colony.
Well, Spain threatened to attack Holland again, so they fled, and they originally were going to go to Guyana in South America because they heard of the perpetual spring, the nice weather. But then they remembered that the Spanish wiped out a French settlement, 1565, in Florida, around Jacksonville, Florida. It's called Fort Caroline. And so the Pilgrims said, don't go anywhere near Spain, and so they decided to go to Jamestown, which was started 14 years earlier. The Pilgrims get on a boat, but it leaks. It's called a speed well, and it leaks a second time, and so then they have to consolidate to the Mayflower. And they've wasted time and eaten through food, and now they're coming across the North Atlantic more in the winter, and it's freezing. One of them falls overboard, John Howland, and they, fish him back in the boat. Another, you have the main beam cracks, and they have to pry it back in place. One person dies, a baby's born. They finally make it to the coast of America, 66-day journey, 3,000 miles. They were confined to the 'tween deck, like a 4-foot-high space, for 66 days. And it's not a cruise ship. There's no privacy. It's rocking back and forth. And anyway, they get to the New World and find out they're 500 miles away from Jamestown. They try sailing south, but off the coast of Cape Cod, it's really shallow. They almost sink. The captain goes back to the Plymouth Rock, and he says, off the boat. And they said, well, we have a question. Who's going to be in charge? There's no king-appointed person in our little group. There's just 102 of us here, but nobody's been picked by the king. We were going to go to Jamestown. They do something unique that we remember them for. It's called the Mayflower Compact. They take their little covenant church form of government and they make it their civil government, right? So their church government is a covenant government. There's no bishop, right? It's just the people. Well, they decide to do that, and it's called the Mayflower Compact. We, in the presence of God, covenant ourselves together into a civil body politic. And that becomes the model for New England. That's why we look, in the womb of the Mayflowers conceived the child of self-government. Instead of top-down rule by kings and chiefs and, kaisers or sultans and czars, it's bottom-up rule by we. Just the 102 of us. We're all going to agree under God. And so they land, and it's now in November, and it's cold, and they start building their first building, their meeting house. And the guys are working hard, and they're sweating, and they're getting chilled, and they're getting sick, and they're dying. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen. Half of the Pilgrims die the first winter. So by the spring, you only have 50 of them. Only 4 women. Only out of 15 women died. There's only 4 women left alive, right? And anyway, they probably would not have survived had not an Indian walks into the camp and talks to them in perfect English. Like, whoa. And so it's the story of Squanto. And about a dozen years earlier, where the the pilgrims were religious, other people weren't, and you had Spanish, gold, and pirates. And Dutch pirates, French pirates, English pirates, Henry Morgan and Peg Leg, the French Leclerc pirate that had 100 ships in his pirate fleet from St. Lucia, in the Caribbean. And so pirates not only stole Spanish gold, but they would also kidnap people and take them to Malaga, Spain, and sell them into slavery. And so guess what? Captain Thomas Hunt, English, he lures some Indians off the coast of Massachusetts and says, hey, you want to see what ship looks like below deck? And they climb below deck, and they close the lid, and they lock them in, and they take them all the way across the Atlantic to Malaga, Spain, and sell them into slavery. Well, one of those was Squanto. And when the monks, Franciscan friars, find out about this, they make such a big stink, how dare them sell these natives, that they get them freed. And then Squanto gets his freedom, and he hitchhikes his way across Europe, makes his way to England, learns the language, does a bunch of odd jobs for a dozen years. And then he finds a fishing company that has an expedition to Newfoundland. And they have him come along as an interpreter, and then they finally drop him off in 1619 at his old stomping ground where he was kidnapped from, off the coast of Massachusetts, only to find everybody was dead. Wow, what happened? Well, a French ship had shipwrecked off the Cape Cod, and the sailors got ashore, but the Indians never left watching them and dogging them till they got the advantage, killed them all, but 3 or 4 whom they sent from one sachem, Indian chief, to another, making sport with them, using them worse than slaves, and evidently one of them must have had an illness, and the Indians caught it, and it wiped out the whole tribe. Now, in a backwards sense, had Squanto not been kidnapped, he most certainly would have died in that plague because everybody else did. So Squanto is now living with the neighboring tribe, the Wampanoag, and the pilgrims land, half of them die, and in the spring of 1621, in March, you could just picture an Indian going into Squanto's teepee and say, hey, Squant, you wouldn't believe it, there's a bunch of English people wanting to start a settlement in your old stomping ground. And so Squanto walks out of the woods and walks into their little pilgrim settlement, and he says, oh, you guys from London? Yeah, I used to live there. Yeah, there's St. Paul's Chapel and the wharf down, and then he's talking about this place. He goes, oh, I grew up here. I know this place like the back of my hand. Over that hill's a spring, and he says, you're going to start fishing. And they said, we tried. He goes, no, these are salmon. They spawn. And looking at the moon, you got about 2 weeks in April. This river is going to be packed. You're going to be harvesting salmon. And then he says, you got to plant corn. They go, we tried it. He goes, no, you got to put a fish where you plant the kernel, and then the fish decomposes, and it fertilizes the soil, and you have a nice stalk of corn. And then he taught him how to take the corn, put it in a pot, and shake it over a fire and make popcorn. And then he taught him how to go down to the riverbank and squeegee in the mud and catch eels, and then harvest clams. And William Bradford said, neither was there a man among them who had ever seen a beaver skin until shown by Squanto.
So, so providentially, if Squanto hadn't been there, the pilgrims may not have survived, I suppose.
Yeah, William Bradford says he was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation.
Let's take a break right there, and then we're going to be back with more with Bill Federer, and we'll get right to the Thanksgiving celebration.
Consider the Mobius strip. Take a strip of paper, twist it, connect the ends. This connection forms a continuous loop. Seamless, infinite. That's how your healthcare should be too. At Tanner Health, the Mobius is our symbol and our promise, representing our continuum of care and our commitment that the services you need will be here for you always. We're not just changing healthcare, we're redefining it. See more at tanner.org.
Oak Mountain Academy is an innovative school of academic excellence celebrating over 61 years. I'm Patrick Uran, head of school, inviting you to join us on the mountain to see our mission and vision in action. Academic excellence, a faith-based environment, and dynamic opportunities are just a few of the reasons our families choose Oak Mountain Academy. Academic scholarships and tuition assistance are available. For more information, visit us at oakmountain.us. Discover your journey at OMA. Prepare, explore, and achieve.
Good morning. Welcome back. We're talking to Bill Federer, a good friend, and we have Bill on every morning at 6:50 and 7:50 with the American Minute, and we're referencing his book, The Treacherous World of the 16th Century, and how the Pilgrims escaped it. And we're talking about Squanto, the famous native who really basically kept the Pilgrims going in the harsh of winter. So pick it up from there, if you would, Bill.
Yeah, so the Squanto puts them on good terms with the other Indian tribes, and after the first harvest, Squanto has Chief Massasoit come with 90 Indians. So there's almost twice as many Indians at the first Thanksgiving than there are Pilgrims. And the Indians bring, deer and turkey, and the Pilgrims have their, cranberry sauce and puddings, and the end of the day, the Indians roll up in their fur blankets and go to sleep and wake up the next day, and Thanksgiving goes on for a second day. And then they do foot races, and the kids are, leg wrestling and playing games, and then at the end of the day, they roll up in their blankets and then wake up the third day. So the first Thanksgiving went on for 3 days, and so this was just a beginning of this relationship. Chief Massasoit later falls ill, and the Pilgrim, Edward Winslow, doctors him up, and he recovers. And the fine print was, if you doctor an Indian chief and he dies, you die. So it's pretty serious if you make a mistake. Anyway, the chief lived, and so they had a 50-year peace that went on between the Pilgrims and the Indians. And so that's why we look back to this time that the Pilgrims pioneered self-government. They came here for religious freedom. They got along with the Indians, and largely because Squanto was their interpreter, and they were religiously motivated. Virginia was a mixed bag. It was started 14 years earlier, and they had Indian attacks, they had massacres, they had starvation, and so forth. But the Pilgrims didn't have that because they got along with the Indians.
Bill, we're going to extend the program 5 minutes because we've been able to work that out. Tell us, I remember in Holland, the concept of a Thanksgiving, though, we talked about the Spanish going into Holland, and also the Jews fled to Holland, and so the Feast or Tabernacles. So really the concept or the idea of a Thanksgiving, did not the Pilgrims kind of bring that with them from Holland?
Yeah. So the Leiden, Holland, was freed from Spain in the 1500s, and the Prince William of Orange decides to have a day of Thanksgiving annually to celebrate victory from Spain, but also Jews. So after 70 A.D., when the Roman Emperor Titus had the Jews driven away from the Holy Land, and they were it's called the diaspora. They're scattered around the world. Well, the largest Jewish settlement in the world is Spain. They're called Sephardic Jews, and they existed between the Christians and the Muslims. So in 711, 80,000 Muslims invade Spain and conquer it. And it takes a 700-year reconquista to drive the Muslims out of Spain. And the Jews were sort of surviving. They weren't quite Christian, and they weren't Muslim, and right. And so they were tolerated by both, but in a sense they weren't trusted by either. And so Ferdinand drives the Muslims out of Spain, and then Ferdinand decides to force the Jews to either convert and become Christian. They were called new conversos or Morenos, or they had to flee. And so you had some Jews fled back to the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, Fez, Morocco. Some Jews fled to Portugal, and then some Jews fled to the Netherlands, to Holland. And they settled in Leiden, where the same city the Pilgrims settled. And there was a rabbi who taught Hebrew and Aramaic at the University of Leiden, and William Brewster, one of the Pilgrim leaders, taught English and philosophy and so forth. And so you began to see the Pilgrims identifying with the Jews, saying, you left the Pharaoh, we left the King of England. You crossed the Red Sea, we crossed the English Channel. You found your promised land, we're still looking for our promised land. And so that's why, they even taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. And they studied this 400-year period before Israel got a king. It's called the Hebrew Republic. And they use that as the model of how to have a government without a king. You teach everybody the law and that they're personally accountable to God to follow it. And so the Jews had their 7 feasts throughout the year, but in the fall they had the Feast of Tabernacles. It was to celebrate the end of the harvest. And so the thought is maybe the Pilgrims got the idea of a Thanksgiving from the Jews. Well, they come to America, and now it's the end of the harvest. They decide to have this day of Thanksgiving. The 90 Indians show up. It goes on for 3 days, and that's why we look back to this wonderful holiday. Now, the left does something called deconstruction. It's a socialist tactic where you go into a country and you get the students to reject the country's founding. And you tell them that, they took land from Indians, sold people into slavery, they were chauvinists, and you keep drilling that till the kids are repulsed by the founders, and then you get the kids into a neutral, open-minded, comparative religion, and then you give them your pitch for socialism or LGBT or trans or Islamism. And this drive, neutral, reverse deconstruction process has been used by socialism even from the French Revolution on. So the French Revolution, they would destroy statues of good King Henry IV. They dug up the grave of Saint Genevieve and trashed it, and then they went to a secular Europe, and then it's now becoming an Islamic socialist Europe.
Now,
But
let's jump back because we're going to run out of time. The reason we know so much about the Plymouth colony is because William Bradford had a journal, did he not?
Right. William Bradford and Edward Winslow helped write the Mort's Relation. But William Bradford's Plymouth Plantation is the main history book. And one interesting story is they tried communism. What do you mean? Well, they didn't have money, so they had to approach investors in England. So in England, they had the British East India Company, right? They had tea and so forth, and opium and china plates from China. But then they started the Virginia Company, but then they started the London Company, and it was the London Company that financed the Pilgrims. And it took 40 years' worth of beaver skins to pay off their debt. But these investors wrote bylaws that said everything would be owned in common for 7 years. Everything got by cooking and hunting and fishing and trading shall go into ye common stock, and everybody's livelihood shall come out of ye common stock. They tried it and almost starved to death. It said that the younger men objected to doing twice as much work as the old guy, but got paid the same. The old guy objected to be ranked in labor with the humbler and younger ones and considered it an indignity. And he says, as for men's wives, who were obliged to do service for other men, such as cooking, washing their clothes, etc., they considered it a kind of slavery. And nobody wanted to plant, and so they were starving. And so William Bradford scraps it, gives everybody their own plot of land, and he says, now the women went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them to plant corn. Well, before they would allege weakness, and to have compelled them would have been thought great oppression. And so they have an abundant harvest because they rejected this owning everything in common stuff. And then in 1625, they send ships back to England filled with dried fish and beaver skins to pay off some of their debt and to do some more trade. a Turkish man of war, a Muslim pirate ship, captures the one ship and takes it down to Morocco and sells them into slavery. And William Bradford says, and now, because of the ship taken by the Turks, all trade is dead. So even the Pilgrims had to suffer Islamic jihad, piracy.
And they were still obligated to pay off that debt.
Yeah, and they eventually did. And then Squanto died. William Bradford said they were exploring around the shoals of Cape Cod out in the water, and they got caught in a freezing rain. They put in a little island, and he says, here Squanto fell ill of Indian fever, bleeding much at the nose, which the Indians take for a symptom of death. He begged Governor Bradford to pray for him that he would go to the Englishman's God in heaven. Well, who was the Englishman's God? Well, they were Christians, and they were serious Christians. They were willing to leave England because they were so serious about their Christian faith. And so Squanto saw them, and he said, I want to go to your God. So I believe he converted. So
Tell us, as we wrap it up, and as we approach Thanksgiving, speak just very briefly on the adversity they faced. I mean, it was the trip over, the lack of provisions, the weather, possible hostile natives. I mean, this was adversity with a capital A.
Well, it was, and you're highlighting all the important things. One part that's often overlooked: had they gone to Jamestown, there's a good chance they would have died. Mm-hmm. Jamestown was experiencing famines, Indian attacks. One report, even maybe cannibalism a little bit. It was like this terrible situation, and basically Jamestown was founded in a swampy area with a lot of mosquitoes, and so they were always suffering with a bad location. And so had the Pilgrims made it to Jamestown, they may have died too. So it's almost providential that they did not make it to Jamestown. And then the Squanto story reminds me of Joseph in the Bible, sold as a slave by his brothers, and he's down in Egypt, and then later there's a famine, and Joseph's able to provide for him. And it's the verse in Genesis says, you meant it for evil, but God turned it around for good. And so it was evil that Squanto was sold into slavery, but he ended up becoming a savior-type figure to the Pilgrims, helping them to be able to survive and get food and make peace with the surrounding Indian tribes. And but just a fascinating story. It
is, and I think one important to reflect upon this Thursday when we're enjoying hopefully a bountiful Thanksgiving meal, that these people led the way, and not only in establishing the underlying core form of our government, but just how to work with and deal with their neighbors.
Yeah, and in colonial times, and this is all in a book, it's called The Treacherous World of the 16th Century and How the Pilgrims Escaped It. And so my website's AmericanMinute.com. And and then,
Bill, it's always a joy to have you on, and we encourage everybody to go to AmericanMinute.com and also to listen twice each morning on WLBB at 6:50 and 7:50 each morning. Bill, thank you for joining us this morning by phone, and of course, we wish you and your family a very happy Thanksgiving.
Well, happy Thanksgiving to you and all the listeners.
And thank everyone for listening. And Community Voice brought to you by Tanner Health System and Oak Mountain Academy. Happy Thanksgiving. Go out and make it a great day. You're in tune to WLBB Carrollton.